The Senate is one of the few places where you can be in the minority, and then the next day you're all of a sudden in the majority. And that's what happened to our next guest, Senator Roy Blunt. Welcome back, Big 550 KTRS, sir.
Well, good to be with you, McGraw. Not exactly the next day. It was 4 painful years in the minority in a Senate that really didn't get a whole lot done, and I'm hoping we can turn that around.
What happens to you now? You're in the leadership in the minority. What happens to you now?
Well, we'll elect our leaders tomorrow. The Republicans in the Senate will, and I'll be running for the same job I had, though any leadership job in the majority is better than any leadership job in the minority. The majority gets a chance to craft the strategy of what comes to the floor, how we get things done in a way that the majority does, in a way that the minority doesn't. And my colleagues on my side of the aisle will be chairman of committees, and that's not been decided yet either, but the chairman of the committee, again, has a lot more influence on what happens than the top person from the other party. On the appropriations committee that I sat on, I've been on the agriculture, FDA, rural development committee, the lead Republican on that, but there's a difference in being the lead Republican and the lead Democrat. But I will say on those issues, Mark Pryor, who's been the chairman and won't be coming back to the Senate, has been great to work with. Arkansas and Missouri agriculture and our view about what happens at the Federal Drug Administration have been very much in line, and so we've had a good partnership, but my responsibility, if I continue to do that, would be to be more of the leader of that new partnership than to be the second person on that committee. So we'll see. I think it's really important, as I said on your program a week before the election, that Republicans do everything possible to show that the Republican Congress wants to be a governing majority, not just a complaining majority, and looking for the things that can be done, as well as making it clear the areas where we don't agree with the president. But that doesn't mean that everything that gets on the president's desk isn't something that the president can sign. I expect a lot of work to be done, and I'm going to do my part to see that happens.
So that's the $64,000 question, is that in the Senate you have to work with the opposition, you have to work with the other side, you actually have to say this bad word, compromise maybe even, and not get 100% of what you want. It has been such total gridlock over these last 4 years and so volatile. How do you now switch that into sort of getting something done with the other side?
Well, I think part of that is me being willing, and Republicans in the Senate being willing to vote on things that we just as soon not vote on. The real pin-up work in the Senate has been the decision not to do anything that involved amendments, not to put your members at risk if you were a majority leader Reid. And I think what happened was his members went home, and in state after state, there was no way they could really prove that they were specifically focused in important ways on their state, rather than just on the very few votes that were taken, all of which, one way or another, seemed to be votes that the president had to have the Senate vote on. So we're going to see more amendments. I'm going to be voting on a lot more than I voted in the last 4 years, and I'm more than willing to do that. Some people say, well, gee, you're 2 years away from running again, and why would you want to do that? And I said, look, I was in the House a long time. We were always 2 years away from running again, and you can't do this job and be afraid of the work required to be done. And getting back to the appropriations bills, bringing those bills to the floor, letting every member of the Senate challenge every penny being spent is the way you set your priorities. And if you go years without defending your priorities, you forget why your priorities are your priorities, and more importantly, the people you work for don't hear anybody explaining why this is the way this needs to be done, and this is what we're choosing to spend your money on. And challenging that is a really good thing.
Did you just break news and announce that you're running for re-election in 2 years?
Not.
Okay, you did not. So in other words, you're breaking news and saying you're not running for re-election in 2 years.
I'm not doing that either. It's, I'm going to concentrate on the work that needs to be done and try to do this in the right way. And I'm doing all the things I need to do to run again. but let's see how the Senate works in the next 6 months or so.
All right. So in January, you guys take over. What do you think 1, 2, or 3 things you will be able to get on the president's desk first?
I think we'll be able to put a bill on the president's desk early that shows our commitment to more American energy, more North American energy. One way to do that is the bill that would allow the Keystone Pipeline to be built, an application Canadians made to the United States over 6 years ago now. It's more than the individual impact of that. It's a signal that we're ready to take advantage of the competitive opportunities we have in North America for energy, in the United States of America for energy. I believe we can put a bill on the president's desk very quickly that he's asked for, which is to give him trade promotion authority. The president asked. Senator Reid said no, it wasn't going to happen. There's a bill that I believe we should do early to show that when we agree with the president, we're willing to put something on his desk that he wants to see happen. I think there'll be some legislation pretty early that addresses transportation. How we deal with the budget itself will be critically important. And the Senate's passed one budget in 5 years, even though the law requires the Senate to pass a budget every year. The Senate just hasn't done that. So that in and of itself will be a big moment. And then letting how we spend people's money be challenged openly and publicly for the first time in 7 years will be another big moment, and that takes some time, and there's nothing wrong with taking the time necessary to do people's business in the most public way.
Senator Blunt, just a quick moment left with you. What are your thoughts as you watch Governor Nixon's news conference yesterday about Ferguson? It's not just a local story, it's a national story, and now some type of international story. What are your thoughts as you sit and watch what's going on?
Well, it is a national story, and I think in Ferguson there are two different moments of how this is dealt with. One, the moment, the tragedy of the loss of Michael Brown's life, and there are at least 3 different groups looking at that. So that's a different thing to talk about than what happened after that. And frankly, after that, I think that the police learned a lot of lessons at Ferguson, lessons they can share with other people of how to deal with that kind of situation. Chief Belmer, Captain Johnson, others have said, here's what we finally figured out that we could do that worked the best. That should be shared. But the fact that lots of bullets were fired, but none of them were fired by police officers. 5 people were shot. Those were, in some cases, literally the police used the equipment they had to go in and get civilians who had been shot by other civilians out. Those are lessons we ought to learn, too. So I think the response is a continual learning thing, but I've had lots of conversations over the last several weeks and a number of conversations over the last week with both local officials, with police officials, with community leaders. How do we accomplish the goals, frankly, that the governor yesterday said should be accomplished, that people have a right to protest, but the protesters have a right to be safe in their protest, and others have a right to be safe in ways that that protest might endanger if it gets out of control. And there are a lot of competing things going on here, and I am going to continue to be watchful and involved in that.
Senator Blunt, always a pleasure. Be safe, and we'll talk to you down the road.
Hey, good to talk to you all. See you soon.